Hello. In this video, we are going to talk about Simone de Beauvoir, a well-known existentialist feminist thinker of the 20th century in France. Simone de Beauvoir was born in 1908 in Boulevard Raspail in Paris, and she was born in a bourgeois family. The family morality was very restrictive, and partly she reflects that in her works in the later period. At the age of 21, she went to live with her grandmother, and it is where she started attending lectures at Sorbonne. She joined the University of Sorbonne, where she met Jean-Paul Sartre, with whom she continued to have a lasting friendship as intellectual equals. And her encounter with Sartre has also greatly influenced her thinking. During the Nazi occupation time, she didn't find much resistance for her intellectual career. So in the year 1943, she published four important works: Les Bouches Inutiles, translated in English as Useless Mouths; Les Sangs des Autres, The Blood of Others, as well as later she also published other important works. One of the significant works that she published was her trip to United States, which she published in 1948. The book is titled L'Amérique au jour le jour, America Day by Day. It is a critical work on the social problems, class inequalities and racism she witnessed during her visit in the United States. Two important novels, fiction that she wrote, reflected her personal life. The first one was L'Invité, published in 1943. In English, it is translated as She Came to Stay. And the second one she published in 1954 with the title The Mandarins. She also published the most important work in the latter years, of course, which is very familiar for all of us, the book titled Le Deuxième Sexe, translated in English as The Second Sex. This work established her as a great political and philosophical thinker, particularly as the one who championed feminism. She also wrote a book titled Pour une morale de l'ambiguïté, translated as The Ethics of Ambiguity. Another book she published was titled La Longue Marche, Essai sur la Chine, translated in English as The Long March. In this lecture, we shall discuss three important contributions that de Beauvoir made. The idea that we find in her book, The Second Sex, the idea of the other, again the idea of the eternal feminine, and her critique of the binaries. Let us begin with this idea of the second sex and the other. De Beauvoir uses the term other throughout the second sex to diagnose the female's secondary position in the society. De Beauvoir's primary thesis is that men fundamentally oppress women by characterizing them on every level as the other, defined exclusively in opposition to men. Man occupies the role of the self or subject, woman is the object, the other. Man is essential, absolute, and transcendent. In contrast, woman is considered inessential, incomplete, and mutilated. Man extends out to the world to impose his will on the world, whereas woman is doomed to immanence or inwardness. Man creates, acts, and invents. Woman waits for him so that the man can save her. De Beauvoir states that while it is natural for humans to understand themselves in opposition to others, this process is flawed when applied to the genders. She explains that according to the philosopher Hegel, reality is made up of the interplay of opposing forces. Self-understanding is much the same. For a being to define itself, it must also define something in opposition to itself. In her own words, I quote her, at the moment when man asserts himself as subject and free being, the idea of the other arises. For every subject, there must be an object. This reciprocal relation is a primary tenet of existentialist thought, and it points to the fundamental problem with the male monopoly on subjectivity. This idea is uneven and imbalanced when applied to the relation between men and women. Throughout human history, man has occupied the role of the self, the subject, the absolute, the free being. Man sees woman as the object, the deviation, the inessential. She only has a value as a sexual partner, and she does not have an independent existence. According to the male schema, woman is contingent, deviant, and inessential. Woman completes man, but she herself is incomplete. Because it is fundamentally unnatural to live in the role of object, woman hesitates between the historical role offered her and an assertion of her liberty. To accept a role as the other, the woman must deny a great part of her humanity and surrender all claims to freedom. In defining woman exclusively as other, man is effectively denying her humanity. Simone de Beauvoir is interested in trying to find answer to the question how women became subordinate to men. She first turns to biology, then psychoanalysis, and then to historical materialism. For her, these disciplines reveal indisputable essential differences between men and women, but they provide no justification whatsoever for women's inferiority. They all take women's inferior destiny for granted. Simone de Beauvoir tries to trace back to history how there was an emergence of male superiority in society from the nomadic hunter-gatherers through the French Revolution and contemporary times. Here she finds ample examples of female subordination, but again, no persuasive justification for them. History, she argues, is not an immutable fact, but a mere reflection of certain attitudes, preconceptions, and even injustices. Let us now move to her idea of the eternal feminine. De Beauvoir discusses various mythical representations of women and demonstrates how these myths have imprinted human consciousness, often to the disservice of women. The myth of the eternal feminine takes many forms. At least two of them are often witnessed and practiced in contemporary times. The first form is the sanctity of the mother, and the second form is the purity of the virgin. In all these cases, this approach of eternal feminine in all the forms, whether it is in terms of sanctity of the mother or the purity of the virgin, it denies women's individuality and traps them inside unrealizable ideals. She uses the phrase the eternal feminine to describe all the terrifying processes of fertility and reproduction that arose from male discomfort with the fact of his birth and the inevitability of his death. Simone de Beauvoir hopes to debunk the persistent myth of the eternal feminine by showing that it arose from male discomfort with the fact of his own birth. Throughout history, maternity has been both worshipped and reviled. The mother both brings life and heralds death. These mysterious operations get projected onto the woman, who is transformed into the symbol of life, and in the process she is robbed of all her individuality. To illustrate the prevalence of these myths, Simone de Beauvoir studies the portrayal of women by 5 modern writers and examines the impact of these myths on individual experience. She concludes that the eternal feminine fiction is reinforced by biology, psychoanalysis, history, and literature. Simone de Beauvoir traces female development throughout its formative stage, in childhood, in youth, and in sexual initiation. Her goal is to prove that women are not born feminine, but shaped by 1,000 of external processes. She shows how at each stage of her upbringing a girl is conditioned into accepting passivity, dependence, repetition, and inwardness. Every force in society conspires to deprive her of subjectivity and flatten her into an object. Denied the possibility of independent work or creative fulfillment, women must accept a dissatisfying life of housework, childbearing, and sexual slavishness. Having brought the woman to adulthood, Simone de Beauvoir analyzes the various situations or roles the adult woman inhabits. The bourgeois woman, according to her, functions three major functions: as a wife, as a mother, and as an entertainer. No matter how illustrious the woman's household may be, these roles inevitably lead to immanence, incompleteness, and profound frustration. Even those who accept a less conventional place in society, like a prostitute or a sex worker, for example, must submit to imperatives defined by the male. Simone de Beauvoir also reflects on the trauma of old age. When a woman loses her reproductive capacity, she loses her primary purpose and therefore her identity. In the final chapter of the section, Woman's Situation and Character, Simone de Beauvoir reiterates the controversial claim that woman's situation is not a result of her character. Rather, her character is a result of her situation. Her mediocrity, complacency, lack of accomplishment, laziness, passivity, all these qualities are the consequences of her subordination. They are not the cause. Therefore, Simone de Beauvoir points out that just as there is no such thing as the eternal feminine, eternal masculine, there is no such thing as eternal feminine. To put it differently, there is no essence, only experience. All beings, Simone de Beauvoir insists, have the right to define their own existence rather than labor under some vague notion of femininity. Now let us move on to her critique of the binaries. She speaks of three important binaries. The first one is immanence versus transcendence. The second one is nature versus nurture. And the third one is production versus reproduction. Let us begin with the first binary, immanence versus transcendence. Simone de Beauvoir uses the term immanence to describe the historic domain assigned to women, a closed-off realm where women are interior, passive, static, and immersed in themselves. Transcendence designates the opposing male lot, active, creative, productive, powerful, extending outward into the eternal universe. Every human life should permit the interplay of these two forces, immanence and transcendence. But throughout history, man has denied woman the transcendent role. In a stage-by-stage description of women's situation, Simone de Beauvoir shows how women are forced to relinquish their existential right to transcendence and accept a circumscribed, repetitive imprisonment. There is no escape for them except through man, and even this is a dead end. Man has projects, activities, accomplishments, but woman just has man. The second binary is nature versus nurture. Simone de Beauvoir believes that women's inferiority in society is a result not of natural differences, but of differences in the upbringing of man and woman. Male domination is not inherent, but conditioned at every stage of development. Simone de Beauvoir says that man learns his power. By the same token, woman is not born passive, mediocre, or immanent. Rather, she is socialized to believe that proper woman must embody these characteristics, and subtly she is conditioned to believe that denying her true self is the only way to achieve happiness and gain acceptance. To bring about substantial changes in society, young boys and girls must be educated differently from the outset. Since they are born equal, the possibility exists of their being equal in adulthood as well as in childhood. But it is up to the society to change its perspectives. The third binary is protection versus reproduction. Women are both treasured and reviled for their reproductive function. And Simone de Beauvoir explains that one of the central problems of the female situation is the difficulty of reconciling woman's reproductive capacity with her productive capacity. Woman's productive capacity includes her ability to participate in labor or otherwise contribute to the economy of a society. On closer inspection, Simone de Beauvoir finds that reproduction and protection are not mutually exclusive. A woman's reproductive capacity should not stop her from fulfilling a position in society beyond home. Woman is neither exclusively a worker nor exclusively a womb. Throughout history, woman has been enslaved to her reproductive function. Her life to the present has been an uninterrupted succession of pregnancies, and her contributions to society have been restricted to her womb. Technology has failed to incorporate women into the workplace, for she must still juggle the burdens of childbearing and child rearing unassisted, an impossible task for even the most energetic mothers. For women to achieve more than liberation and enter the workplace as man's equal, the nuclear family must be reconfigured so that she is able to leave home. Social stigmas against unwed mothers and abortion must be lifted to allow women to take charge of her own pregnancies and control her own life. Though it is important for women to be permitted to participate in work, it is more important for her to be integrated into the totality of human reality, to become a true partner to man. These are some of the important contributions Simone de Beauvoir made to the existential thought, particularly from the feminist point of view. Let us now conclude the ideas that we have discussed so far. Simone de Beauvoir is definitely credited to be the forerunner of French feminism, with the publication of her important work, The Second Sex, in which she carefully studies the history of women's oppression, revealing woman as the other as defined by patriarchy, and claiming that one is not born a woman, one becomes a woman. The text is technically astute yet passionate plea for the abolition of what she calls the myth of the eternal feminine, and she is considered by some scholars to be among the definitive declarations of women's independence. Through her life, she had gained the respect of her peers as a sharp intellectual, determined to live her life with the courage and integrity which she aspired to in her writing. Thank you very much.